then once I get the link, I'll also put it on Facebook straight away.
Okay.
Okay, we are live. Good afternoon. If you're watching this dialogue with Professor Marie Gren from the Sorbonne in Paris, we will be discussing, or actually primarily Professor Gren will be giving us her deep understanding of the developments in France. As you know, France has a very prestigious position among democratic struggles and revolutions around the world in history. And France's long struggle for democracy, which famously or infamously began in 1789, is far from over. And we are entering the era of Le Pen and Macron, although Emmanuel Macron won the presidency again with 58% of the vote. His far-right rival, Marine Le Pen, received more than 40% of the votes, which is actually very, very worrying. And so I've invited Professor Marie Gren, the professor of public law, full professor at the Sorbonne, the Panthéon Sorbonne, constitutional scholar and a student of French politics. And she's also worked in a number of international settings, including working as a foreign clerk at the Israeli Supreme Court. And also she served as a public advisor to the Supreme Court equivalent of France, or that handles civil and criminal cases. And she speaks to us from Paris, despite her very busy professional and family schedule. Marie, thank you so much for coming on the dialogue. I'm really, really honored that you take the time to speak to me. I have informed some of my activist colleagues around the world about the dialogue that we will be having. And so tell us, about the background of this, the last election that, finished yesterday with Macron's victory in the runoff.
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me. Thanks for having me. I'm really glad to have the opportunity to discuss this with you. So what I will do is I will just make a very short presentation of the context in which these elections take place. And I will just do this by telling you of a few major dates that symbolizes the evolution of the system in which we are now. So the first marking date is 1958, which is the beginning of the Fifth Republic, so the system in which we currently live. The important thing to remember from this date is that 1958 is, for some scholars, considered as a coup d'etat by the General de Gaulle. Although it's not technically a revolution, but General de Gaulle came to power because the previous republic, which was completely swallowed by the war in Algiers, called de Gaulle for help. And de Gaulle came and said, okay, I will come and take you out of this military situation, but I want a new constitution. So the constitution of 1958 is wrote not only, but a lot under the pressure of a general who was not a really good friend of democracy and who did not really believe in protecting rights. So let's say that the frame in which we are today is a lot created by that general. So 1958 already starts as a strong power given to the executive. And this explains why today we are in the situation we are now. So 1958 is the first date. Then 1962 is again the importance of the General de Gaulle. In 1962, General de Gaulle decided that he would submit to the referendum the question of whether the president should be directly elected by the people. This was, again, very much criticized because it was not something that was in the original constitution. And de Gaulle did it against the wording of the constitution. So again, a revolutionary act, but not necessarily in the good sense. And he won the referendum. And that is why today we have a president that is elected directly. And why did de Gaulle decide on doing that? Well, he was attacked. There was a terror attack against him. And he said, I have the legitimacy of history because I'm the winner of World War II, but the people that would come after me, they would not have this legitimacy. So they need the legitimacy of the vote. So it can be surprising coming from this general, but he thought that the people coming after him will not be as charismatic as him, and they would need that. So this is why we have a president that is elected directly by the people. Although, and I must emphasize this, the Constitution of 1958 was really meant to create a balanced system that would be a parliamentary system with a strong executive. So we are not the American model and we are not the British model. We were supposed to be a mix of the two, which turned out to be really bad. And I can explain that if you want in the question. Next important date is 1971. What happened in 1971, General de Gaulle was dead, and that allowed our Conseil Constitutionnel, so it's a sort of a court, but it's not really a court, that is dealing with constitutional matters, to create a Bill of Rights. So 1971 is actually a good time if we think in terms of values, where there is a beginning of understanding that there should be a constitutional protection of rights. I can elaborate on that, but it all happened when Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre, famous right-wing activists, were prevented from expressing certain ideas through a newspaper. And this triggered a series of events that finally led to the idea that we need to protect freedom of association, so the possibility to create an independent journal. And this was upheld by this Constitutional Council in 1971. Next, 1974. In 1974, again, a good evolution from the system if we think in terms of democracy. It was decided that it was possible for a minority in parliament, so 60 parliamentarians, could ask the Constitutional Council to rule on a law and say whether it's constitutional or not. And that would mean that the opposition would have a tool to protect and uphold the rights. So it started rebalancing the power. But still, the system was still meant to give extremely strong power to the executive and even more so to the president. So until, and that is my next date, 1981, the people that were in power were very much affiliated to the thought of the General de Gaulle. But 1981 is the election of the first leftist president, François Mitterrand. Now, François Mitterrand had been an extremely strong critic of General de Gaulle, saying he was a dictator, so on and so forth. So when he was elected, everybody expected him to change the system altogether and make it more favorable to parliament, so to democracy. But it did not happen at all. The minute Mitterrand sat in the presidential chair, he said, well, this is absolutely fantastic and I can do whatever I want as a president. And he did not change anything. He made the system even more presidential. So many people say that actually the one that is responsible for the concentration of power that we witness today is not de Gaulle, it's Mitterrand, because he's the one that could have changed something and he did not change it. Okay, so then the next date is 2000. In 2000, there was a reform where it was supposedly more democratic. They decided that the president should not sit for 7 years, but for 5. And everybody thought, fantastic, less time in office, that means more voting, that it means more democracy. Sounds good. Okay, so submitted to the referendum. Of course, the French people said, yes, of course, we want to vote more often because this gives us more power. But the result, unfortunately, was exactly the opposite. Because what happened is that the legislative elections were 5 years. So if you have 5 years of legislative election and 5 years of presidential election, it means that legislative and presidential election happen almost in the same time, which is what we're going to witness now. In June, we are voting for parliament. So it's very, very close. And that's actually very bad because it means that first you vote for the president, and then a couple of weeks later, you will vote for the presidential party. So that gives even more power to the president because the president has now, for certain, a party on which to rely in the lower chamber, the Assemblée Nationale, and it helps him pass any law that he wants. So again, in terms of balance of power and so on, it's really bad. Last two important dates, 2002, first democratic shock. 2002, Jean-Marie Le Pen, the father of Marine Le Pen, is elected in the second round of the presidential election. As a result, everybody is very, very moved, and everybody go to the poll and vote for the opponent, which is Chirac, which wasn't very popular, but he is elected as a reaction. We have witnessed that 2 more times, 2017, so the daughter, Marine Le Pen, and now 2022, again, Marine Le Pen again against Macron. The only thing I want to say before I finish and then I'll answer your question is that I have to say that we call it the Republican awakening that the appearance of the extreme right has provoked is becoming less and less. So there is less and less desire to oppose the right wing, and I can explain that. I think it's more political science than law, but there is a reason why it's becoming more and more acceptable to have extreme right appearing in the second round.
Yeah, you know, we'll get into the more institutional and historical, issues. But I was watching Channel 4 News in UK, which is, considerably a lot more intellectual and in-depth than the usual, BBC channels. And, even Channel 4 anchor covering the elections from Paris, Matt, he was lauding Emmanuel Macron's bad victory. Apparently, European Union leaders, US leaders, even like Vladimir Putin, was, these guys were congratulating Macron. But I think what worried them, this accepting Putin, who is supposed to be, supporting or bankrolling Le Pen's party, right? As Putin has done in a number of far-right movements, and in the US, UK, Brexit, it's the information surfacing that there has been a steady Russian involvement in moving, the liberal democratic societies really to the right, the more authoritarian, less democratic. And so the worry for many of us who call ourselves like Democrats or activist progressives, is that Le Pen got more percentage this time than 2017. Although she is the loser, but she's only 58 and she's allowed to run again. And, Macron will not be able to run for the third time, So give him 5 years. The French society is like obviously moving towards the right for a number of reasons that you will explain. Do you think the worries from outside France, about the rise of far right, and in France, are justified, or are we projecting our fear of right-wing ascendancy in different countries?
Well, okay. First of all, I'm not a political scientist, so I'm more speaking like a citizen than like a constitutional scholar. But I think there are a few things that should be taken into consideration. The first one is that within the political sphere, there are now people that are more right-wing than her, which is something that did not exist. She was the end of the right. And so someone like Zemmour, for example, has made her look almost moderate. So that's the first thing. Then she changed her discourse. I'm not saying she changed her party. She changed the name of her party from National Front to National Gathering, Rassemblement Gathering. So I mean, the terminology is quite speaking of itself. And she has changed the way she speaks. So she has, I don't know what she thinks, but she has managed to make herself look more moderate than was her father. So she's less scary, she is more consensual. So there is something also about political tactics. She has ousted her own father from the party. So I don't know if it's a personal evolution or if it's just tactics, but she manages to make herself look less dangerous than her father. So I think that's one thing. The second really important thing is, I think, and it's something that we spoke together when we met, there is a failure, and I think that is why Macron has been very criticized, but he's not the only one. There is a general failure in the last years of the liberal left to provide for the poor, the people that feel on the margin, and they feel left on the side. So if they happen to live in a surrounding that is favorable to right-wing idea, they might quite easily move from extreme left to extreme right, which seems strange, but it's not so much, because they don't have a political platform. They have no one that would speak in their name. And the only barrier that is still remaining for people not voting for Le Pen if they are poor or excluded is the racial undertone of the extreme right. But she is making it less and less and less. So she is sort of taking also a weird political position, which is somehow occupying also the extreme left. And Mélenchon, so the third, the winner, said something quite witty. He said, Le Pen is the politics of Macron with the racist approach, and Macron is the politics of Le Pen with the classist approach. Because, and maybe that will answer some of the later question, but the left has failed to take into consideration the poorest and the most marginalized citizens, and they are the ones that are voting for her.
Yeah, so it's almost like the white working classes in US and UK
Yes.
who vote for candidates that will not serve their interests, right? So like, these like white working class voting against their own economic interests because they are given, some racist flavor that go down well with that, right? And so like, Chomsky talked about the United States Republican Party and Democrats as well. Like these politicians have nothing in common with the working peoples across different, the racial communities, and yet they talk themselves as a common people. They're fighting for common, but they're all millionaires, right? Politicians in U.S. or particularly in U.S. and also to a lesser extent in U.K. as well. But you have a scenario where Macron is a former investment banker, finance minister, and elite of the elite. The way he dressed. I mean, you look at it. I mean, like designer dresses, right? And most people in like social housing and other people, they have nothing in common with them, right? And then so you've got basically Macron is a right winger himself in the economic and classist sense, right? And he serves the interests of the rich, and that's why one of the charges leveled against him is that Macron lives in the rich world and promote the rich interests. That's Can you tell us about the this economic dimension of or class dimension, in the classical sense of the word class, the economic aspect of Macron's presidency 5 years, because as you so well know, the Yellow Vest movement, Gilets jaunes, was sparked by Macron's, taking the country to the right in the economic sense, making employers and corporations easy to hire and fire, raising the pension age, disempowering the working people. So I think that will be really interesting to understand.
So first of all, I think it's important to say that Macron officially started as a left candidate. And I think that's one of his particularities, that he worked for the socialists, and he started as a socialist. So when he was elected, there was this sort of misunderstanding. Of course, he was an investment banker, but if we start looking at the biography of our politicians, we had one postman that was never elected. We don't have, France is maybe not a monarchy anymore formally, but if we look at the structure of our political class, 99% are people that are very well off. So anyways, he wasn't more well off than others in that sense. And he lived on this ambiguity in 2017 when he was elected. People thought he is new, he is young, he's going to bring new ideas. And people from the left thought, okay, maybe he's just going to bring some new vision of the left, because the left was already in a very bad state when he was elected. And as his mandate went on, everybody realized he is more and more and more and more like a Thatcher, and not at all on the left. I'm talking economically, not in terms of other aspects, but in terms of economy, he turned out to be really, really, really liberal. And of course, that was really perceived as a treason by part of the left, which is the part, by the way, that voted for the third candidate, that is Jean-Luc Mélenchon. So I know a lot of people that were socialist that decided to vote for Mélenchon, because they felt that, okay, the socialists have nothing to offer, and he is the only candidate left. Just to come back to the Yellow Vest, which was a really terrible episode of social fracture, the interesting thing is that it was sparked by a taxation on gas, on gasoline. And the difficult aspect in it was that the reason why it was put forward was supposedly to protect the environment. To say, okay, people are using their car too much. If we raise the price of the gas, people will start using it less. But the truth is that people, I give a concrete example, people who live in the suburbs of Paris and they need to come to Paris for work, some of them have a very difficult access. So anyways, they will use their car. Or people that live in the countryside and their workplace is 10, 15 kilometers and there is no public transport because the public service is disappearing in France, they will use their car anyway. So they are the ones that for them, €3 more per filling up a car makes a huge difference. So they just got angry because of that. It's a little bit like 1789, we have no bread. Here it's, we have no means of transport and we are asked to work. So it wasn't really unorganized, there was no thought, it was a very disorganized movement. And for a really long time, it didn't even have any representation. There was no one that could say, I am the leader of the Yellow Vest. It were just people saying, enough is enough. We are not allowed to live and we don't care about your environment because we can't even afford a living. And I think this is a very interesting point because it shows why the Socialist Party has lost the battle, because the Socialist Party has more and more focused on environment, which in the absolute is a really good thing. And it will maybe bring me to the mayor of Paris. I mean, I am very much in favor of protecting our common planet. But the thing is that if protecting our common planet happens at the expense of people who cannot afford a living, there is a problem. I mean, you can't ask the poorest people to bear the cost of the failure of an entire civilization. And it's a little bit, I think, how it was perceived by the Yellow Jackets. Again, a very diverse movement ranging from extreme right to extreme left. But I think it's very representative of why we have no left because the Parisian left, how I call it, has focused on protecting trees over humans. And this is a discourse.
The people on the left bank.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the socialist mayor of Paris.
You mean Anne
Hidalgo? Yes.
Hidalgo, yeah.
She represents that we like to call, there is a saying in French, we call it gauche caviar. So like the caviar left, meaning you eat
champagne Marxist kind of.
Yeah, exactly. You drink your champagne with your caviar and you say, oh my God, there are so many poor people in the world. Yeah. Something like that. So she represents that. And I don't think she's ill-intentioned. I mean, she indeed made, so many roads for bicycles in Paris. It's really nice now to ride the bicycle, a little bit less dangerous. But the people who actually come to Paris to work with their car, they are getting nuts because they cannot circulate. So there is a sort of conflict within the left of what are we fighting for? And I think there is a deepening, we are like setting apart two halves of the left, one which is the middle class bourgeoisie, which I am part of. I mean, I know I belong to that, but in terms of values, they would say, okay, we need to protect the environment before anything else. And then, okay, what happens to the people that don't care about their environment, but just about feeding their kids? And they are not taken into consideration. I give you a last example. I know I'm not going to make myself friends when I say that, but we have now, and it's a European measure, I hear it, but we have now an obligation to have numbers on our cars depending on the level of pollution. Sounds fantastic. Yes, we should not have cars that are polluting. I have a young child. I don't want him to breathe disgusting air. The problem is, who is capable of affording buying these cars, which are not polluting? The person that has a really low income will not be capable of buying it. So he will keep on polluting and taking the risk of being controlled by the police for not respecting the regulation because he entered Paris with a polluting car. So that again shows we are talking now only in the left, I'm not even including the right in the picture, that some people that may have traditionally belonged to the Socialist Party would probably, I'm not a political scientist, so I don't know how accurate is that, but I suppose they might, some of them have turned to Marine Le Pen because they said, okay, we have nobody on the left, or to Jean-Luc Mélenchon, which is considered by some as extreme left. But the central left has become too centric and too weak to answer the problems of, you know, globalization, so on and so forth. And I think that explains the rising of Marine Le Pen. It's not necessarily that France is becoming more racist. I think the Marxist reading of politics is quite accurate for France now.
Yeah, in terms of the cultural politics, the people who feel threatened by the presence of the largest pocket of the French of Islamic faith, right? The Muslims, right? So for them, there is this Muslim question, the same way there was a Jewish question in the old Europe, that was so infested with the anti-Semitism. Now, like, you've got Islamophobia. They're on the same wavelength. Anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. They belong in the fascist camp, right? Ideologically speaking, because communities of people are marked or categorized in a negative and pejorative way. It's simply because of their religious or racial identity, right? And so there's a mainstream French society across classes, right? Like educated and less educated classes, well off or poor, super rich. For them, the presence of Muslims threatens what they consider the French identity. Can you explain the difference between Macron and Le Pen? Because Macron has also made a rather, I would say racist, Islamophobic comments. And also he has also made, very colonial comments about Africa and other places, right? Maybe Europeans are less sensitive if they do not have roots in oppression or colonial experiences. But for some of us who came from former colonies, we are very, sensitive to such kind of colonial and white-centric, white racist, Christian-centric comments. What are the differences, between Le Pen and Macron with respect to the France's, growing, the Muslim communities?
Okay, that's a really difficult question, to be honest, but I will try to differentiate the two. And I'm not an expert on these questions. There are people that are much more qualified than me to answer it. So it's more a general understanding that I have. First of all, if I start with Le Pen, I would say this is just, it's horrible to say, but it's a tradition of her party. I mean, the party of her father is itself inherited from fascist parties. Okay, so they just go along a very old, unfortunately, French tradition of being openly racist, whether it's anti-Semitism or anti-Muslim or anti-whatever. If you are not basically French Catholic, you're just not French. But this has always existed in France. I think it will always exist. And unfortunately, we know that everywhere in the world, some people think they are better and more, I don't know what, than others. Okay, so there's no need to talk about that, because I think we know this phenomenon quite well everywhere. What is a bit worrying is not so much her, which has actually, she has become less and less anti-Muslim. I mean, she's very careful with what she says about that. So again, I don't know if it's her personal evolution or political strategy, I don't know. But what is worrying is that it has become more acceptable in general to have these comments that are, you could not say directly, oh, this is racist, but something feels really not okay. So for example, inside, I'm not even talking about Macron, but inside the government of Macron, there is a minister who has made comment about the fact that Jews and Muslims alike should not have access to either halal or kosher food in supermarkets, because that means that supermarkets are cooperating with communitarism. And I mean, I was one of the only one that was shocked and thinking, what is he talking about? But there is an explanation to that, which I think is very, very French, in the sense that France has built itself on a very anti-clerical, anti-church spirit. And at the time, it was really not against Jews or Muslims, although they were obviously not really much liked. But already in 1789, in the French Revolution, and later on, there has been this will of saying France is not built on the church. We need to make ourselves independent from the influence of the church. And this is a very strong credo that if you are French, you are for religious neutrality. So to give you an example, if I were Muslim, I could not go and teach constitutional law with a hijab, because this would show my religion. But this is creating a problem when you're a practicing Jew or a practicing Muslim. Because if I'm a practicing Catholic, well, nobody knows and nothing shows that I'm a practicing Catholic. But if I'm a man and I'm a practicing Jew, I will wear a kippah. If I'm a woman and I'm a practicing Muslim, then I will wear a hijab. So already, I mean, the French doctrine of laicity, the idea that the state is neutral, is naturally a little bit against Jews and Muslims, because the way Jews and Muslims practice religion does not go very well with this doctrine. So in France, we can see for a really long time these emerging threads that, they are a little bit putting us as a civilization in danger. This is not new. And I mean, it's something that is unsolved. But Macron, I think, again, I don't know what's in his head, has allowed himself to make this comment, I think, just political strategy. I really dislike him, but I don't think he's racist. He just wants to take the votes of the extreme right. When
I mean, like after, after he made, some disparaging comment about expression of Islamic faith, in public spaces, he also tried to go back to the Muslim voters, to try to get their votes, right? So for politicians, and what drives them is the need and the desire to just keep themselves in power. So some of them they will do anything, or they will say anything to get the votes. Like what's in their head is almost of no significance. But it's really interesting. You talk about the old revolutionary secularist French tradition. Like you're at the Pantheon Sorbonne, and also in Latin Quarter, you saw the remnants of the revolutions, during which the clerical class were under serious attack. Like the priests were beheaded, along with the aristocrats and the elements of monarchists, and also the church, symbols were smashed. And so, but what's interesting to me is that this, secularist, revolutionary tradition, treating state as a neutral party, in this, vis-a-vis the society and different interests, but from a Marxist perspective, we know that no state is not a neutral body. That's just a liberal rubbish, right? The state is, basically an expression and a venue, an instrument of different class interests. That's why people try to, capture the state to advance their interests. But French revolutions provided, the three very powerful slogans that, liberty, equality, and fraternity, right? And if the mainstream French society cling on to the revolutionary ideals of, secular state and non-religious expression in public spaces, have they fought and clung to those old ideals? Because has equality been extended to different groups, right? Are people equally free to pursue their the interest or activities? So how much of these revolutionary ideals for which France has become famous for been realized over the last 200 years? I mean, within the French democracy, within the French constitution, my understanding is like the French, even Catholic French women, the real French, yeah, were not allowed to open their own bank accounts well into 1960s. That's my understanding, right? And that's like, 200 or almost 300 years after the revolution, right? So what is the reality vis-a-vis the ideals of, the revolution?
Well, first of all, you said, you talked about women. It's important to say that in 1789, it's a declaration of right of men, but it's really not of human, it's of men and citizen. And in the same time when this was made, there was a very courageous woman called Olympe de Gouges who offered a sort of parallel of declaration of rights of women. And well, she ended up being beheaded.
Was that the Lady Liberty leading the people? The famous painting. Yeah.
No, it's not her. It's really in 1789. Lady Liberty is in 1848, I think.
I see.
But no, she was a very, very special character, and she wrote. I can send you after the link.
The right of woman.
The right of woman, and she said, okay, if you have a right of man, you are talking freedom and equality. Okay, I'm offering you to have freedom and equality for women as well, and this was rejected. So already,
and then she was beheaded.
And she was beheaded because she disagreed with Robespierre, who was the leader of the time.
The terror.
The terror, and he said, "Okay, you want freedom for women, so I'll cut your head." Obviously, the starting point wasn't good. It was freedom for men. And we are quite late even for the right of vote. We had to wait until 1944. So after Second World War, because women were so important in the war, that it became really difficult to say that they could not vote. So as far as freedom of women is concerned, I think until the 1960s, it was really bad. I can say now, I think my ultra-feminist friend will not agree, but I could say, well, now it's okay. I wouldn't say it's perfect, for sure it's not, but things are really, really, really improving. You have women in many places, and it's easier. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's easier. But when it comes to equality, well, I think, again, it's a failure. If we talk just after the war, it's a failure of the left. That equality has been, I mean, we have the ideal of equality, if we talk very concretely, embodied in the notion of public service. And I think that's one of the big achievements of France, that for a really long time, and I'm talking in the past because this is becoming, unfortunately, past history, we had free access to education, free access to hospitals, free access to schools. And this is an extremely good promoter for social equality. Because if you're sick, if you want to get educated, if you want to get to university, even if you want to get a housing, you could get help from the state. So, I mean, yes, the state is not neutral, but the state as a provider was a really strong ideology, and this has worked until quite recently. But the reason why Macron, again, is being targeted, but he is just finishing to undo what has been undone in the last 20 years, is that we are destroying this public service. So we will bring back more inequality. We were on a good track. We did not reach equality. I don't think it's even possible. It's an ideal, but we were on a good path to increase equality. And this is being dismantled, supposedly or not supposedly, because there is less and less public money. But I just want to say that there was, just before Macron was elected, there was a scandal that there have been a lot of public money spent on private companies like McKinsey that were giving advice to the government on how to do things like who to vaccinate, who to not vaccinate, how to improve schools, and so on and so forth, when we have so many specialists that are already being paid by the state. So I understand that maybe we have less money, but I mean, also the way the public money is being spent should be questioned. And it's particularly difficult to hear that we need to cut down on expenses when at the same time we see that private companies are benefiting from such a flow of money. So
yeah, I mean, sorry to interrupt. I mean, UK has a similar type of regime. You know, during the last 2.5 years of COVID, pandemic. The British government used, or I would say squandered, about £700 million, the hiring consultants and, like giving out contracts to outside consultant firms that are run by the cronies, of the Westminster politicians, right? And we've got a public relations department in every single ministry, and then they brought in outside public relations firm, like civil servants whose job is to figure out what would be good strategies to get the COVID message out to the public, how to educate about vaccine, like consultancies, like £700 million, right? And so I think like the pandemic has given them golden opportunities to abuse and misuse public resources. Governments by definition do not have money. It's, what government spent is public's money, the taxpayers' money. So now the question that lingers on is the runoff and the elections before that. Had a center very much on the Frenchness, protection of the French identity from the onslaught of the people with foreign roots and migrations and whatnot. But all societies are deposits of different waves of migration throughout the history. Every community, even birds and animals, like they migrate to greener pastures, right? So this is not something that we should be afraid of. Like this is part of a natural history of humans and living beings. Animals and creatures migrate to places where they can breathe and where they can have food for their children, right? And so, who is considered French? When the cultural right wing talk about French, that includes working class people who view themselves as real French, and who view others who arrive later as like foreigners, and then in other words, like, what is the degree of like acceptance and tolerance within the French, the mainstream white Catholic society?
Okay, first of all, I have to say that although I was born in France, I still don't understand what it means to be French. and I'm turning
Yeah, you
37.
also have like, you know, Polish
So,
roots as well, right?
yes.
I mean, like then, like, you know, like someone like Marie Curie. I mean, the French state was like fighting the Poles that to claim Marie Curie to be French, right? I mean, she was
Yeah.
Polish in origin and identity by identity. So sorry to interrupt. Carry on.
But so I mean, it's very difficult for me to answer that question because I really don't understand. I don't think there is a strong French identity. I would say if I have to make the effort to try to understand what is the argument, I think probably, but it's not even religion, because religion is not so present. We don't have, it's not Poland, which I have part of my family, where, for example, the Catholic Church is really present. It's not really the case for France. So someone that would say, I'm French, you're not, it's not necessarily because you don't go to church. So it's maybe a Catholic culture, but it's not a Catholic, it's not the religion anymore. So it's the leftovers of a culture, but certainly it's not really practice. So certainly the religious divide is more cultural than in terms of actual faith. It's not because you believe in this or that I don't consider you as French. It's because culturally you behave. So it's more in terms of behavior. Again, you wear a hijab, you have a kippah, you don't have the same holidays as we do. You do some strange things like slaughter a mutton or not eat the same food. So you're not like us. But it's really cultural. It's not. I mean, it's not like what you can see in India, for example. That we don't believe in the same thing. No, it's really you don't behave like we do. And I think it's coming probably with a layer of, again, this secular. So it's weird because it's a layer of religion and then on the top of it, a layer of secularism. So it's again a very strange mix, but secularism would mean, okay, whatever your religion is, I don't want to know about it. And again, it doesn't work if you're a practicing Jew or a practicing Muslim, because in the street, I can tell who is practicing because I see you wearing a kippah, I see you wearing a hijab or the robe if I'm a practicing Muslim. So it's a question, it's almost a visual question. I see you, I see that you're a stranger. So I would say, and you can hear it in the speech of Éric Zemmour, who himself is an immigrant. Okay, he is
the
super
guy from
right-wing.
Algeria, right?
Yes, he is an immigrant, but what he is saying is, yes, but I became French. And what he means, so he's a Jew from Algeria. I mean, you cannot make more migrant than he is, right? But he said, but I became French. And what he means by I became French, and I think it resonated with a lot of people who did the same, is I became invisible. My origin is my business. Maybe he's practicing. I don't know anything about his personal life. Maybe he's eating kosher. Maybe he's not. Nobody cares because nobody knows. And being French is being a sort of neutral citizen. Again, we know it's not true, but it's very difficult. Again, if you have religion is one thing, but let's say even if you have a culture that is visible in the way you dress, in the way you eat, in the way you talk, in the way you sing, I don't know, but as the minute it's visible, you're a migrant. So it's not racist in the sense that you can be anyone you want, you can be born anything, you can, in that sense, I think French are more open than other culture. But we don't want to know. You do this in your home. This must be hidden because in the public space with your neighbors, you should be neutral. I'll give you just a small anecdote just to say it's not only about Jews and Muslims. I just talked to someone who is from Sweden and his mother is from a very small, so she's from Sweden and she moved to France like 30 years ago to a very small village. And when she arrived, she didn't speak good French. So she had 4 kids. To the first 2, she spoke in Swedish because she was not capable of speaking French correctly. But she learned French and her neighbor kept on pressuring her, telling her, why are you speaking Swedish to your friends? you are, to your kids, sorry, you are French now, you should speak French. So the last two kids don't speak Swedish because she accepted to become French and speak French. So of course, in the media, you will see, it's against the Jews, it's against the Muslims, but no, it's being French means you speak French and you behave French, no matter what it means, because I mean, it means that your culture should not be visible. And obviously it's easier if you're white and Catholic, but being too openly Catholic, not good either. This is also not French.
Yeah, I think that, I think at the crux of the issue appears to be the exercise of power, right? A group of people um, that have considered the institutions and the social spaces their own. I think I mean, the Nazi history, and wherein the towards the end, the Jews were not allowed to walk in public spaces, and like they were ghettoized. Yeah, and okay, like if they see a Nazi officers, they had to cower. Yeah, like then even like wearing beards, right? Like in places like Krakow, there were images of like Jewish Polish Jewish men that were openly abused by the SS officers, like a rabbi having their beard cut with scissors in public, that kind of thing. And then so I think it is on a continuum. I don't, I see this as an extremely dangerous scenario where, the public space is dictated by the norms of one group vis-a-vis the others. Like, the modern societies, or all societies, have always been multi-ethnic and multicultural, whether imperial or colonial ancient times or the post-World War II. Societies are always integrated, right? To make them fit for just one norm and at the expense of other norms, normative behavior. I mean, that is an act of repression, right? And so I don't take identity politics lightly, because
I mean, first of all, I should say that it's I mean, I make a very dark picture, but obviously this is not all French, right? I was answering only on what is French in the eyes of extreme right voters. I don't think this is something that applies. And I mean, I live in Paris, which is an extremely multicultural city, and I think most people that live in Paris like it. So I mean, I should say that it's not. I mean, and I still want to make a difference with the Nazi or fascist ideology, which I think is important. It's that I'm not saying it's not there is no repression in that behavior, but in the French concept of Frenchness, anybody can become French. It's not the Nazi or the German conception of a nation. In the German conception, if you are not born German, that's over. Okay, so even if you were the most German of German Jews, you are not German. It's not true for France. You can become, at the risk of losing your own identity. That is the part of the problem. But it's open in the sense that anybody can be that. Even if you're a Jewish, a Muslim, or both, or whatever, you can be French the minute you decide that you agree to the French values. This is exactly the speech of Zemmour. Because he himself, he cannot say you should be French, because he's not French in the sense of being born in France from a white Catholic family. What he is saying is, but you can become French. Just make an effort, just give up in the public space your identity and you will become French. I think it's a bit different from saying, even if you do that, you're still going to be the enemy undercover and all of this, which we have seen in anti-Semitism. That is this idea there is a hidden power or something like that. It's not this type of oppression. It's just saying, basically, do whatever you want, but just do it in private.
Yeah,
And I
thank
think
you.
it's a bit different.
Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate you making the distinction between the German notion of Volk, the nation based on blood. And, I understand, like, in Germany, if one of your ancestors was German and you were born in like the United States, you could still claim citizenship in Germany, based on the fact that my grandfather, who died 10 years ago, was German, right? So this was very much blood-based. You're either born, in other words, either your blood is German or you're not, right?
Yeah.
So like there is no opportunity of being accepted or integrated into the society. So the French model of the becoming French is cultural assimilation, right?
Yes.
You assimilate culturally, behaviorally, then you will be French, or linguistically, right?
Yes.
And then but my final question, like the moving forward, what do you see the next 5 years, considering that the French society, the electorate, is so bitterly divided, right? There's so much anger because, like, one of the journalists that cover the Yellow Vest movement, she tried to put the election in a proper context. She said, this isn't election about who the French electorate want to elect. This is about who they don't want to elect. So the vote went to the other candidate that they hate less. It's rather than a popularity contest of the two contestants, it becomes contest of unpopularity. Who is more unpopular, right?
Yeah.
So at the moment, Le Pen is more unpopular, but she's only trailing Macron by 15 or 17%. But that gap can easily be filled in the next 5 years when the economic and cultural conditions evolve to become more conducive to far right ideas. And so, how do you see the next 5 years unfold under Macron? And then almost half of the French society don't want to consider him their president.
Well, first of all, I should say that the electoral process is not completely finished. And there is a very important part, which usually is not important, which is the legislative elections of June. Precisely because of what you said, that it's an unpopularity contest, we have no idea what is going to be the majority in the lower house of parliament in June.
You mean that's National Assembly? Yeah?
Yes, we don't know because, I mean, normally, if it was a popular vote, then it's almost given that they're going to vote for the party of the president to give him the means to rule the country. But he is so unpopular that now we don't really know. So the third candidate, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, that almost won, just a few hundred, thousand votes difference with Le Pen, he just said, I want the French to elect me as a prime minister. It's not accurate in terms of constitution. It's not the way it works because it's the president that is choosing the prime minister. But I don't think it will happen, but if he had a majority in the lower house, that would completely change the system, and that would not allow Macron to conduct the same policy that he had been conducting in the last 5 years. So I think we should have this talk again in June.
Yeah, so you see this as something that can create the constitutional consequences, right?
Yes.
If the popular the people went to go to the poll in June, decide to deny Macron control of the lower house, right? And that would create a constitutional issue.
Yes, and it might give much more power to parliament and much more power maybe to the prime minister, depending who it would be. And that may temperate a little bit the liberal trend that Macron has created. And I hope, but I'm just hoping, that this would maybe give the left a new, I don't know, reason to ally, because the left has been, you know, also this, it's also the fault of the left. We can blame everybody, but the left is so, you know, broken into pieces that maybe then they would get some sense and start working together in parliament, and that would allow to rebuild the left camp, which is the only one that can now oppose Le Pen, because then there is only more right. So I mean, if we're on the hopeful side, we can hope that in the next 5 years there would be a leftist candidate that would manage to, you know, gather together the leftist camp and offer a concrete and real alternative to what she has to offer. But if this does not happen in the next 5 years, yes, you're right. I think she has a good chance of winning, because who can oppose her? And on the right, there is no one either.
Right. Yeah. She has made herself acceptable to the large swath of the French electorate, right? And then that very, very last question. I mean, as you're an educator, you know, socially and politically involved, what do you see the potential of the you know, the youth, the new generation of French citizens? You know, can they move the French society in the direction that is more progressive, that is more democratic, and that is more self-empowering of like marginal communities, you know, in France?
Yes, for sure. I think we, I'm not a demograph, so I don't have the figures, but I think I don't know what's exactly the balance, but I can say that that's really like very approximate what I'm going to say, but I think more old people would vote for Macron, and more youth would vote for La France Insoumise, so the third leftist party. That's very approximate what I'm saying, but I can just, from the discussions I have with young people around me and from what I have seen in the news and so on and so forth, I have the feeling that there is a very strong discontent of the youth with Macron, and they don't really believe in Le Pen either. So they are the ones that could help create a new, more balanced left, only if this left party takes into account ecology. And because I think the environment is what, not all the youth, but a big part of the, let's say, politically active youth, is that they are very worried about the global warming, and they are equally alarmed by inequality and global warming. And I think these two things should start being taken into consideration together. And if the left manages to gather together around such a project, yes, I think they have, I mean, they have enthusiasm and they have, you know, the energy to bring change. So I think they are a potential force. The question is how to mobilize them and not just make them disgusted with politics and just, you know, some of them say, okay, if it's like that, I'm just not going to vote. And this is when the left is losing the battle.
Yeah, I mean, youth cannot be alienated from politics, because politics dictates whatever happens in their lives. And so, you know, as an educator, you know, the people like yourself have enormous responsibilities to make sure that the
Thanks,
youth,
my shoulder are getting heavier.
yeah, exactly, and the older generation, you know, leave a bigger and bigger mess that the younger generation will have to solve. And so, but on that, you know, hopeful note, I want to thank you for speaking to me, and it's been really educational and informative for me, and I hope it is for those who listen as well. You've been listening to Professor Marie Gren, the Professor of Public Law and Constitutional Scholar at the Sorbonne, the Pantheon Sorbonne University in Paris. Thank you so much, Marie. Have a wonderful week.